the opera Siegfried, the second opera, the third opera of Wagner's Ring Cycle. Siegfried in that, who's the main character, he's the one that all of the fates have been, he's the solution everyone's been waiting for in the story, and he's a total punk. And so I think he's borrowing. I think Anakin is obviously corrupted by his good desires, his desire to save his wife and family. But I think Lucas's approach there is more Buddhist than Aristotelian or Christian, I think. He's got, his answer is just to let things go, that the suffering comes from desiring things rather than the notion of letting providence take its course.
You were, what was it? I'm sorry. You were talking about what makes an object in Tolkien bad. So like what corrupts an object and makes it bad or evil. So like what makes it good or an object good?
I'm trying to think of some good objects.
What about? I'm sorry to interrupt. What
No.
about what?
Let's make a discussion. I mean, this is obviously something that we're interested in talking about. I think there are few enough opportunities for people to discuss literature they love. I'm going to step back.
Well, as far as good objects, there's what the elf queen Galadriel, what she gave all the hobbits and fellowship members as they passed along. There was like that vial, the starlight in it. There were the brooches.
Yeah, the brooches and
Brooches,
the little cloaks that made them
Yeah.
sort of semi-invisible.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, and they say, and we put the thought of all we loved into these things.
Yeah.
So they really are representations of the craft mastery of the people who have done it. And that's Tolkien's idea of what artifacts should be like. He disliked manufactured. Someone wanted to interview him, and they brought in a tape recorder, and Tolkien insisted on performing an exorcism on the tape recorder. Consented to the interview. I think that Tolkien, as an Aristotelian, wants to see a much closer connection between human capacities and the instruments we use on those.
So another way of saying that what makes a good object different from a bad object is that a good object is limited. When the Elven Queen, she gives Frodo the what's it called? The thing full of the vial. It's like a flashlight, and occasionally it glows bright enough to make spiders afraid, but she didn't hand him like a submachine gun. It's not like, here, if you're ever in a problem, just whip this out, and you'll be good.
That would have been awesome, actually.
That would have been pretty awesome, but it kind of would have reduced the whole thematic. Anyway, so it enhances, Frodo's courage. It enhances his ability to deal with situation. It's not some instant problem solver.
It works when Frodo draws on his own capacities.
Exactly. Just like you were saying earlier with, in the martial arts movies, they spend years training, and by the time they can just kill someone instantly, they know that it's not nice to kill people instantly. Because you built it up, because you have that base of knowledge, that experience, you know how to use it, responsibly, you know how to wield it properly.
So a good object will call upon your own capacities and force you to. It will enhance your own good qualities, while a corrupted evil object will just be a shortcut to an end.
One point here too, and that is, remember that Lord of the Rings is in fact a piece of modern literature. I mean, it was written in between. It was written around World War II. It was written in the mid-40s. It was written at the same time that a lot of standardly modern works of literature were written. And so while Tolkien disliked the subject matter of modern literature, he was, I think, a pretty subtle master of its effects. And what you are getting in, what the presentation you are getting in the book is the Hobbit's judgments, not Tolkien's. Remember, it was supposed to have been from this red book. And so you are getting the Hobbit's point of view, and the Hobbits don't know everything, and they're not very reliable narrators. I think Tolkien's own judgment about the elves, he's not nearly as enamored of the elves as the Hobbits are. He thinks it's way past time for these people to roll their socks up and get out of town, right? Go back to Valinor, ask for pardon from the Valar for the awful things they did during the First Age, and just leave Middle-earth. So Lorien is basically, in the story, kind of like Versailles in 1790, 1787, 2 years before the French Revolution. It's all going to get swept away, one way or the other. And they have long, and that's one of the things I liked about the movie, because one of the things you end up with in the book is that, why don't the elves, they're supposed to be these wonderful characters, why don't they ever lift a finger in the war? And that's why I thought it was so cool when the elves show up at Helm's Deep. All these inhumanly beautiful warrior elves show up, and all these riders of Rohan standing around. You can tell, just tell they smell, right? All the men. I thought that was a terrific scene. It would have made a better story, but I think that would have gone counter to Tolkien's purpose, and that is Tolkien's purpose was to treat the elves as kind of as roi fainéants. I mean, they're fading kings. They're just about to leave, and they in fact don't have much influence anymore. It's just time for them to go. So he's much more sort of cold-eyed about them. And that's one thing to look for in the story, I think, is don't take the hobbits as the world authorities on what's going on in this world. And that's why I think all those extra appendices in the back are so essential. Then you start getting I think Tolkien's own view of the matter. And he doesn't think this victory over Sauron's permanent. I mean, he knows that people are going to continue being people.
Going with Sauron being darkened by perhaps like a fall, do you think Gandalf has an obligation to uncorrupt or purify Sauron? And if whether or not he does, how could Gandalf go about doing that?
It's just the metaphysics of Sauron is something I'm not sure I understand. Does he sort of cease to exist at the end? We know that. I mean, Sauron was just an emissary, right? He was just kind of a henchman. The true bad guy is Morgoth. I mean, he didn't have just orcs; he had Balrogs. Right? He was true BA. And we know that Morgoth's still around, because he just got shoved out the door of night. He just got shoved out of the physical universe. But he's still there, clawing at the limits, trying to get back in. And you get the sense that one of Sauron's enterprises is to try to figure out a way to get Morgoth back in. But I don't know. I don't know what happens to Sauron at the end. I always assumed he ceased to exist. I'm teachable on this.
Now that you kind of mention it, I'm just sort of suddenly realizing that Sauron and Lord Voldemort's mortal limitations are basically the same. I mean, when you think about it, the Ring of Power is basically a Horcrux. It's a piece of his soul is in this physical object, and when you destroy it, he just dies. So when you think about that,
I think Rowling was a careful reader of, in very much the same way I think Tolkien was a careful reader of Wagner. Mm-hmm. Priscilla Tolkien, his daughter, tells a story about going into London to pick up, from Oxford, to pick up Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, who'd gone to see a Wagner opera together. And there were all of these other, they were all, and so the audience was pouring out of the opera, and they were all in tuxedos and evening dresses, and there were Tolkien and Lewis in their little Oxford professor tweeds. She didn't exactly, looking kind of lost. I think both Lewis and Tolkien loved Wagner's Ring Cycle. They loved Wagner's music. Wagner's music is an acquired taste. I've acquired it. For me, one of the things that makes life worth living. The difficulty is that both Tolkien and Lewis considered Wagner a guilty pleasure, because while the music is wonderful, sort of the thought, the philosophy behind the music is everything that Tolkien and Lewis hated. I mean, hated down to the ground. I mean, Wagner was a naturalist. He was a believer in the religion, sort of in the religion of humanity. He thought we had to get beyond the gods, and both, of course, Tolkien and Lewis were Christians. So I think in some ways Lord of the Rings is an effort to baptize Wagner's Ring Cycle so you could enjoy the music and then reinterpret the music as you go through. And that's very easy to do, because if you've ever seen the opera, especially the last one, Richard Gambron, well, my own view is that there are parts of Lord of the Rings that are written with Wagner's opera in mind. The Ride of the Rohirrim is clearly the Ride of Valkyries. I mean, we could hear the music behind it. With the description of Lorien, you can hear the forest murmurs. Question?
So, well, I was just wondering if you can compare Wagner's music to the actual Ring, because Hitler was a fan of Wagner's music, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So you could interpret that as something being taken good or as bad, as Keo was mentioning, like what can you consider good or bad? So it can.
But Hitler really liked The Merry Widow the best.
Well, what I'm trying to see is that Wagner's music be used as something that is an influential aspect of inspiration, I guess you could say.
Wagner's work produces the same reaction in people that Tolkien's work does. You either love it passionately or you absolutely hate it. Nobody is neutral. Yeah, I saw it. I sort of liked it. Yeah. Or nobody goes to the Ring of the Nibelungs. Yeah. Nobody goes to one of those operas and says, "Nah, yeah, it was all right." They either hate it, and therefore therefore are trying to find the most sinister motives for anyone who likes it and for the person who created it, or they think it's just one of the things that makes life worth living. And that's the Ring Cycle is one of the things that I do check back in on periodically from time to time, and I have yet to outgrow it. And I've been listening to it since college. And what's happened though is that my allegiances have changed. Where before, how can you not? When I was in my 20s, how can you not love Sigmund? He's an outlaw for justice, and he runs in, and he meets the love of his life, and they recognize her immediately. And just when things are darkest, then all of a sudden things turn wonderful. And then he gets killed, of course, heroically. And I've since transferred my allegiance to Wotan, the king of the gods, who's sort of elderly and curmudgeonly. He's got one eye. Things don't work very well. He's running the world, and he's got administrative problems of any kind. He's got daughters, they don't listen to him. I totally understand. I was department chair for 14 years. I know what being king of the gods is like. Overrated.
You brought up alcoholism and also the guy doing reps. Similarly, somebody who's abstaining from drinking and is an alcoholic, making it to 3 years, let's say, and they're just about to lose it, just like the man on his third set of reps is just like, shit, I need to get to my health, which is over there, but it's at the end of the reps and I just can't do it, i.e. the weakness of will, and then just collapse. What would be the kind of solve to get rid of that kind of ailment of just you have no capacity beyond you at that point?
That's
Read more Tolkien.
yeah.
Read more Tolkien.
As a Catholic, Tolkien is going to say there's no real answer. Moral luck plays a great part here. Boromir had the moral luck to have to redeem himself. He was given the opportunity to redeem himself because right at that moment when he's trying to take the ring, the orcs, he hears the horns and has to run back, save the other hobbits. So he gets a kind of moment of grace. Now he accepts it, but that's what saves it. And then Sauron, of course, is given several opportunities to accept grace and refuses them all because he loves his failed projects more than he loves happiness for himself. And then Gollum is just kind of lousy moral luck. I thought a better ending to the story would be for Gollum at the end when he's dancing on the precipice holding the ring, would be to just recognize his situation and throw himself in, as a solution.
So do you think it's it's Calvinist somehow, or?
Oh no. Because you do have to work at it. It's not, although you're given gifts, you have to accept them. Where a Calvinist is going to say that it cannot be up to you whether you're going to be saved or not. The power of God is such that